Just to be thorough, we could also flip our angle, and we could consider each of the columns as representing 100%, and analyze each class separately, and then just see how survival is distributed among those classes. So this would be, we were looking at the distribution of survival conditioned on class, whereas in the last slide we looked at the distribution of class conditioned on survival. So just again review how to turn these into percentages. We would take, for instance, if I take this 118 people and I divide by the 285 total of people who are in second class, 118 divided by 285 times 100, that produces 41.4%. Okay, and similarly, you would take 528 divided by 706, and you should get 74.8%. And then sum the rows. I'm sorry, don't sum the rows because we're not. Sorry, you don't want to consider the rows. That doesn't have a meaningful answer. But you might even notice too when you add those up, you break 100%. It doesn't make sense to add 62.5% to this 41.4% because these are percentages of different totals. The first 62.5% is the percentage of first-class passengers who survived, and the 41.4% are the percentage of second-class passengers who survived. So they're coming from two different groups, and we're not comparing them to the same total, so you don't add them. So that column doesn't belong there. But again, we can see that we could go through and analyze each class and see how survival, the categories inside the variable survival varied among those classes. We've already made a pie chart for the total number of passengers on the ship, and just looked at the first, second, and third class ticket holders in the crew, and saw how those made up the total of all the passengers on the ship. But we could also, if we want to compare two groups, for instance, the group of survivors with the group of those who passed away, what we could do is we could take each column of our contingency table that we made when we were making conditional distributions, right? So we thought of those who survived as one group and those who died as one group, and we thought of those as two separate totals, and then we looked at the percentage of ticket holders in each class for each of those two groups. If we want a more visual way of comparing, we could turn each of those rows into separate pie charts, which we've done. So I did that here below. If you take a look, this is nice because it allows us to just in a very quick manner see how these two groups differed in terms of the percentage of the percentages made up by the ticket holders. So for instance, one thing we could say is that 29.8% of those who survived were crew members, whereas 45.2% of those who died were crew members. On the other hand, 28.6% of those who survived were from first class, and 8.2% of those who died were from first class. This is also another way of letting us, revealing whether or not the two variables, survival and class, are independent, because what we should expect if they were independent is that these two charts should look identical, meaning the proportions should match up exactly. The proportion of those who died who were crew members should match the proportion of those who survived and were crew members in a world of independence. So this gives us a visual way of checking for independence, and since we see that the groups really differ in terms of their proportion in each of the pie charts, that suggests in yet another way that the two variables are not independent. And finally, we can use another visual called a segmented bar chart in order to compare two distributions. And we're going to consider all of those people who survived and all those who died, and we're just going to make what's called a segmented bar chart, which is yet another way of checking for independence. So the first thing to do is just make your axes percentage go up in terms of percentages. So I'm going to make these go up by tens. So there's my 100%. I think I'll label them. It's 20%, 40%, 60, 80. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of turn this circular visual into a rectangular one. So let's just look at the pie chart of those who are alive. 28.6% were first class. So I'm going to make my bar go up to 28.6, which is like right before that one. Okay, so that's first. So I'm actually going to label it just so it's 28.6%, and that's first class. And now let's go over to those who died. First class passengers only made up 8.2%. So that bar should look like that. Okay. Now let's go to second class passengers. We've got 16.6%. Now, here's where you got to be a little careful here, because what you're going to do is you're going to add that 16.6% to the 28.6% we already see. So 16.6 plus 28.6. That tells us what we're going up to. So we're going to go up to 45.2. 45.2 is like right here. Okay, so we added the 16.6%. So that's second class, and they make up 16.6. And then in first class, they made up 11.2. So again, I'm going to do 8.2 plus 11.2 to get 19.4. So I need this now to go up to 19.4. Okay, so 11.2%. Now we'll go to third class. So I'm going to add this 25% here on the left for the survival column. I'm going to add the 25% to the percentage I'm at already, right? So I did 28.6 plus 16.6. That's 45.2, and now I'm going to add 25 to get me to 70.2. So now I need to go all the way up to 70.2, which is like right here. So that's third class. And then we were up at 19.4% for first and second class of those who died. I'm going to add in the 35.4 to get me to 54.8%. So I need to go up to 54.8%. So that's third class passengers. Oops, that's 35.4%. Okay, and then lastly, we look at the crew. Now, we don't really need to do much because each bar has to get up to 100%, so you just need to finish the bar and get it up to 100%. Okay, so that's crew, and they make up 29.8% of those who survived, and they make up 45.2% of those who died. Okay, now it's a little bit of a sloppy segmented bar chart, just to be honest with myself here. But what you're looking for, I mean, what you want to analyze here is you're checking for independence in a visual like this. Now, independence would mean that basically these two segmented bar charts should look identical, meaning the proportions should fall out perfectly. That whatever percentage of those who survived, who were from first class, should equal the percentage of those who died who were in first class, and likewise for all the others. We can see that these don't look that similar. It looks like your chances of being in first class, if you are a survivor, is much greater than your chance of being in first class if you passed away. So they don't match up, which again leads us to believe that these two variables are not independent. Okay, so that sort of wraps up our analysis of categorical variables in the ways of analyzing them, along with this notion of independence.